welcome back to another episode of Analyst Insider with me, Jack J. Today we're speaking to Sam, also known as Montagne, who is the analyst for FlyQuest. Now he's really interesting for three reasons. Number one, he is our first purist, so he really is a data analyst, as opposed to looking at some of the other more wider skills and descriptions we've heard for the analyst role. He really is on the technical coding side, and that means his perspective is quite different to all the other interviews, and I think that's really valuable. Number two is that he is our second guest who works a 9 to 5. Now, unlike Flora, one of our previous, his job actually isn't involved in gaming or esports. However, the technical skills are very similar, which means he's got a really interesting perspective about kind of the stuff that he's learning 9 to 5 and then how he can apply that into the esports world. And finally, he's a fellow Brit. Now, that's only interesting because although we are quite common in casters and apparently analysts, British people are quite rare in League of Legends as players. So we have a little chat about that and about the UK scene in general. Now, a final reminder that if this is the sort of content you really enjoy, then I highly recommend you join the iTero Discord. It's where fellow people like yourself come and discuss and share and all the rest about being a data analyst or an analyst in esports. So if that's the sort of thing you like, please do come join us there. And in the meantime, enjoy the interview. Welcome to the interview, Sam.
Hello.
Pleasure to have you. It's awesome. It's awesome to speak to someone else from the UK, right? We're a small breed in esports, especially League.
Yeah.
Especially with the news about the NLC, with opposition has been made clear.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day because Pete has left the LCS now, and it was sort of something I thought about earlier in the season about how many UK people there are, and I think it's me at the moment. And then there's a couple of guys who like sort of contract themselves out via a company to Dignitas, right?
I wouldn't. They're Spanish. I had to break it to you.
Oh, are they? Oh,
Yeah.
I swear there were some British guys there. Damn, maybe there's some others hiding around. But yeah, I've sort of done my own research on this. But yeah, dying breed apparently. So at least in the NA scene, and then yeah, beyond that sort of tier 2 up, I think it's sort of the same case at the moment. Lots of caster talent though, which is good. But
yeah, a huge amount of caster talent. So we do well there. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we just don't play League as a country that much.
Yeah,
we're very console heavy, Call of Duty, FIFA players. So to get us enough people into League that you also have enough of those people who want to be data analysts is pretty niche.
Yeah, the analyst side especially. Although there are a few, I guess analysts are sort of like hard to view how many people there are. I think we do have our own section on LoL Pros now, possibly, although not very searchable the last I checked. But yeah, I'll see people who are working at like LEC teams who I've never heard of before. I think it's, people only really pay attention to them once they've popped up somewhere.
Once they have a Twitter account, right?
Yeah, that too, and actually actively tweet. There's another part to that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's a good place to start. Is searchable, right? Because before every interview, I try doing some research on the person to get an idea of where they've come from and some topics that might be worth going into. But with you, I found very little. So, is there any reason why you're so difficult to search?
Yeah, I mean, part of it comes back to the UK scene as a whole. That obviously is an issue with sort of player uptake and popularity and stuff. But generally, I don't like the UK scene too much. This is sort of a common thread I've pulled with a lot of my close friends who also work in the esports industry and are from the UK. You'll notice aren't really like actively involved or don't try to actively get involved with the UK esports scene. I don't know, just from my experience, it's like pretty loud and obnoxious in a way. Might just be my sort of prejudices there. But generally, I've flown under the radar. I've been on two UK teams, which garnered a lot of drama. So Diabolus in 2018, when everyone hated them, and then Resolve in 2019, when everyone hated them. So from there, I sort of learnt my lesson of sitting back and just waiting for the right time to jump somewhere else is probably beneficial to me. But it's a little bit sad that it has to turn out that way. And yeah, so we obviously just had Papa Smithy announced on FlyQuest as the CGO. And in our first meeting, he recognized basically everyone and then turned to me and said, "Sam, who the hell are you?" I've never heard of you before. And I was just like, yeah, good. That's how I like to keep things. But no, I mean, it sort of goes counterintuitively against the advice I'd give to people about like making themselves known on Twitter and stuff. But yeah, I'm just not that sort of person. I think I just can't force myself in a way.
Yeah, there's certainly a correlation between introversy,
Yeah.
and being an analyst, right? They seem to
Mhm.
share a lot in common, and it's difficult. We tend to have to force ourselves as opposed to naturally wanting to
Yeah,
express ourselves on Twitter or whatever.
exactly.
Cool. So, I mean, let's go back a little bit there. I know you touched on the two teams, but prior to esports, kind of the whole way through, and then where you are now, it should be good to get a kind of a quick summary of your whole career thus far.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess it all goes back to the days of 2016. I just got confirmation that I was going to study at work. Um, Weirdly, the way I'd heard about work, and I don't know whether anyone else out there remembers this article on the LOL forums, it gave a list of universities with a league society on it. And that article must have come out in like 2015, 2014 time. And the only reason I knew Warwick University existed, outside of it being like an okay university within the UK, is that article. It sort of stuck in my head, which is why I applied. Obviously, it's a good uni for statistics, which is like I did data science, which is part of the statistics course. So it worked out very nicely. But yeah, in 2016, I got confirmation that I was joining, and I looked around for this fabled league society that I'd found years earlier that existed. And yeah, I got involved, talked to the guys in the Discord sort of a month or two before I actually joined university. So I sort of made that my home in my first year. In second year, I was secretary of that society, and we sort of put effort into rebranding to be more generally esports. So we renamed ourselves to Work Esports and League of Legends, and then the year after renamed ourselves to Work Esports. And that was with the help of Jack Fenton, who's now esports coordinator at Warwick University, and Charlie Smith, who is an ex-writer. And yeah, us three together, along with a guy called David Chan, who's sort of not known to anyone anymore. Yeah, just formed the Work Esports Society. And towards the end of sort of my tenure at the university, I turned to Jack and said, I'd really like to continue doing esports stuff. And he suggested that I become analyst for the team that he was about to be head coach of, which is Diabolus. So yeah, I sort of earned my analyst chops on Diabolus for a while. Obviously, at that point, I think it was UKLC, and it was the top league at the time in 2018. I think I was part of the team in 2018 summer. Um, and then after that, Diabolus dissolved. I moved on to Resolve, took a couple splits out while we got things ramped up. And then I was on Resolve for a year, and then I just entered open applications to FlyQuest and got accepted into there. So that's basically the journey in a nutshell, I guess.
Awesome, thanks. I mean, number one, you're being very modest. So for context, for people outside the UK, Warwick University is one of the best universities, probably maybe globally, or if not in the UK, for mathematics specifically. They're very well renowned for that. So I think you called it, average or basic or something like that, which is
Okay,
completely
that's
untrue. The second part is Warwick University is pretty famous in the UK as being the best university for esports. They've won countless awards, and I think
Yeah.
constantly. So Jack Fenton's done a fantastic job there, and I always like meeting those guys. They're always good fun as well at conferences and whatnot.
Yeah, students are always great to run into at conferences because they'll usually be running for drinks like whenever they can. So yeah, I suppose that's the party people while they can be. But yeah, I think it's 4 years in a row now, the NSC Championship. The first one was in my last year, and then from there, I think it was Daniel maybe, then Jack again, then someone else, Foss, and then now it's Cat's turn, I believe, to get the trophy. So hopefully, I mean,
Lots of pressure.
yeah, I mean, the aim was always to become. I mean, this is the way we sort of explained to the sports department at our university, who are like the only people really willing to invest, was that we want to become the Loughborough of esports. Sort of like a term they can understand, and sort of, a prestigious title they can understand as well. And so far succeeding. So yeah, it's been really nice to see that legacy carried through. At least it wasn't all for nothing.
Yeah, for context, because I know that most of the people listening aren't from the UK, Loughborough are kind of like our best sports university for traditional sports. So
That's what happens when you get another British person on it. I'm just assuming so much context.
We're too niche. We're too niche.
Yeah.
So we'll move away from this side of things. And What I'd like to dig into is kind of you as an analyst, because every single analyst I've spoken to so far has a completely different view on what it is as a role. So where would you put yourself in this grand spectrum of being an analyst?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's in a way I'm viewing it as a 2D plane, I guess. Although I guess you could put it as three, as no, yeah, 1D, like two sides, like one in each side, where you have like
He has a
game
maths
knowledge on one
degree.
side. Yeah, there you go. Game knowledge on one side, so that's like head coach or positional coach material, and then on the very other side you have sort of data and technical skill. And I put myself firmly very far on the side of sort of data and technical skill. Um, Although I learned a fair bit from my time on Resolve around drafts and game sense, obviously even a couple of years not really paying attention to it as much as you should, like theorizing and things like that, you lose context very quickly. So yeah, I've shifted further and further towards the technical side as I've picked up more esports jobs. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm most comfortable. So I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, I see like there's disadvantages and advantages to being able to sort of ambidextrous in that game knowledge side, but also honing all your attention to making sure you're as quick as possible and getting things stood up technically. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people refer to it as data analyst and scouting analyst. I don't know how good the term scouting analyst is, but
Mm,
what they essentially mean is they watch a lot of content as opposed to analyze a lot of content. Although the spectrum is pretty small there, right?
yeah.
But then if we do go into that two-dimensional space, you also have those coaching skills of like positional coach and head coach
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. So yeah, it is a wide degree in which you can be an analyst.
Hmm.
And I'd love, given that you are specific to the data side of things, is to get an idea of your day to day. Like, what is taking up your most time? Is it coding or is it output?
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's mostly coding, um, to the point of that being almost 100% of what I do. Um, to speak a little bit about how the sort of concentration shifts between tier of team. It's usually better if you get more specialized people because obviously you're able to hire more with a bigger budget. So having people good at one thing and only asking to do that thing is usually a good idea. Um, so yeah, I mean, at the lower level, you'd be using like Google Sheets and stuff, um, and maybe pulling some data with Python and copy and pasting it in, creating your dashboards in Google Sheets. FlyQuest specifically wanted someone who wasn't using Google Sheets. So although the title was data analyst, I would definitely caveat that with like full stack engineer in a lot of ways. It's my job to figure out a way to procure the data, organize the data, host everything, and show the data in a nice way. So it goes all the way from like the sort of infrastructure side of hosting, all the way to how can I make this usable and look nice to any of the players or other analysts on the team which are using it. So yeah, a lot of there's not much room for the sort of classical analyst watching games and stuff. If you imagine like a full stack engineer cycle to like, hey, Sam, I want a new stat, that goes from procuring that data to organizing it to making it available within whatever application we choose to, and also making that look nice. So, um, yeah, that's sort of what I do. I'd definitely caveat the data analyst title. But yeah, it's just a nice esportsy relevant term. It gives people a general idea.
It's the closest you can get, right, in
Yeah,
the
exactly. Yeah.
industry. If you went to corporation, they would have a very specific term for the role you're doing, which is usually full stack engineer of some
Hmm.
sort. But yeah, in esports, you're either a data engineer, a data analyst, or you're not. Right, like
Yeah.
it's a very specific and quite wide term. Now, when it comes to requirements, so for instance, in your example there, you said a coach or someone will come to you and say, "We need this new statistic created." How much would you say of the work that you end up doing is someone specifically saying to you, I need this, versus you saying, I think this would be good, and therefore I will create it, and they will hopefully enjoy it and use it and find it relevant?
Yeah, so I think working in software full time has been like greatly helpful in figuring out sort of how those conversations should go. Because in all requirements gathering, you have things that the user doesn't know they want, and you have things that they say they want but don't need. So there's sort of two Venn diagrams, where the middle being sort of perfect spot of things they know they need and things they need but don't know they want them. I've phrased that very convolutedly. But yeah, so I essentially just took training. I've never taken really a project management perspective when I first started working at FlyQuest, although I'm sort of in my stage of software engineering career where I have done that now. So yeah, usually, so at the start, it was kind of a mad rush to get things spun up for the split starting. And there's a lot of just classical things within like analytics where coaches are going to want them, things like play rates, win rates, and like match histories and stuff like that, drafts. So it was pretty easy to sort of assume that all of that should be included. And then you get to like sort of interesting, more data analytics, truly side of things, where you talk about like graphical representations, analysis maps, warding patterns, and things like that. So we sort of built it up slowly. But yeah, we're going to be very soon in the conversations for next year, sort of reviewing those requirements as all good engineering is. It's a very iterative process. You're constantly asking the question of, what was important, what should be important, and also leveling that against like difficulty and time it will take to build as well. So yeah, I guess the answer is I take a very a path well worn approach, which is just borrowing all my sort of knowledge from software engineering, rather than trying to freehand and assume things as much as possible. So
Yeah, I think we should probably explain that you actually work a full-time job alongside
yeah.
your role. So could you just give some context of what that role is, how long you've been doing it, as well as kind of how you split your time between esports and real life, as they call it?
Yeah, good question. So I should have mentioned I'm assuming a lot of things at the moment. Yeah, I have a full-time job. I have done straight out of university. Esports has purely been something I've done in my free time. So my full-time job, my first job was at a company called Elsevier, who do academic publishing. If you've ever done a dissertation and use Science Direct or SciVal, it's the company that manages those. And that was within their data platform team. So I got a good knowledge on sort of big data. It was supporting data scientists such as Jack in their access to data and in tools like Databricks and Jupyter, and making sure the data is like nice and portable, and things like that. So sort of infrastructure heavy in a way, because you're dealing with storing data and access to it. And last year, 13 months ago, I moved to a company called Improbable. Both of these are based in London, and it deals with it's improbable defense. So it's militaristic simulation, wargaming, and things like that. And I work right at the bottom of the stack in the infrastructure engineering team there as well. So we do a little bit of scripting, do a little bit of software engineering, but most of my sort of coding, when you think about like Python or I don't want to say Java, but that sort of realm is done in my esports space. Whereas my full-time job is more Kubernetes, Terraform, Argo, all of that fun stuff. So
Yeah, hopefully we haven't lost anyone with the technical jargon. So we
it's there if you want it. Yeah, it's there if
just
you want
Google
it.
those words, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
You'll learn a lot, I promise. Maybe too much.
Yeah. Don't Google
So
too much for sure.
yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you might steal Sam's job. So just going on this kind of like working between esports and your full-time job, are you getting home at 6 p.m., having dinner, and then clocking on to FlyQuest and cracking on with that? Or is it like a weekend job? How do you balance your time? I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, I can't work one job. How's you doing too?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, both um, both jobs are sort of objective based rather than time based, and I think that's really important. And I think that's a sort of new wave software engineering idea, at least, that you shouldn't base work done on time worked. It's deliverables, because that's actually what matters. So yeah, I can usually I work my 9 to 5 in those hours. I won't usually stray out. I'll keep them quite separate. But my FlyQuest work, it's generally on weekends. But if I find time in the evening, I'm bored, I've just lost a load of League of Legends games, I'll do some work there as well. And yeah, sort of fill in those hours. So it's pretty nice, because those sort of evening hours are the ones where the guys in LA are awake. So one of the analysts is -6 from me, one's -7, and then the rest of LA is -8 from UK time. So yeah, evening is sort of when they're up and about. So it's kind of good if I want instant feedback on stuff. Yeah, generally it's just I squeeze it wherever I can. I find like coding pretty fun, so it's not too laborious. I think I'm very lucky that I found two jobs that sort of work nicely side by side, and that I can spend a reasonable amount of time on and not feel too burnt out as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the better parts of being in the data analyst world is that if you are good at your job, which I'm assuming you are, you can set things up so it looks like you're working when you're not working. Right. What I mean is that for your FlyQuest role, there will be weekly reports and weekly data that coaches and players want to have access to that will be done regardless of if you clock in or not, because you have some sort of automated system that's pulling the data and displaying it. So a lot of the stuff that a data analyst will do is kind of you front load it, you do it at the start, and then it kind of automates, and everything else after that is just improvements to that, as opposed to having to actually someone saying like you need to review this specific VOD, which requires a specific amount of time, no matter how good your scheduling is.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's sort of the giant leap as I sort of viewed it in my head, where a data analyst role might take you, a few hours before every match day to, if you wanted to do that automated and you put the time in, then it's taking you no time at all. Again, a path well worn in the world of software. You want to automate things if it's taking too much time. And there's sort of guides to show how much time you should be putting in. But if you can do something for 10 hours and minimize your pre game day work to 10 minutes long, like just grabbing whatever data you need from stuff that's already stored, then you've saved hundreds of hours there. So yeah, that's sort of the leap that I made from Resolve to FlyQuest. Was fresh new slate. I have all these skills, especially in infrastructure engineering, which is useful in automated workflows in the cloud somewhere. Otherwise, sort of just having to leave my PC on all the time. So yeah, being able to like fill in a database at a regular interval, and then front loading that to a front end where analysts can see or download stuff whenever they need, just takes me out of the picture, and that's a good thing because me having to do things just creates friction and time restraints.
Yeah, exactly. It's the benefit of it, which allows you then to work this uh, day job 9 to 5, and
Mm-hmm.
then still be able to produce stuff regularly for FlyQuest when they want it,
Yeah.
which is kind of a restriction if you're working some other roles where you actually need to have like one-on-one time to in order to achieve each requirement of the role. Now, I want to take a U-turn here before we start moving into kind of like the career questions, and I really want to promote Sam here because you wrote an article, and I'm a massive advocate for analysts writing articles. They're really rare.
Yeah.
They're usually really interesting because, at least for me, because they involve data in a way that most people don't view data. So there's always opinion articles that appear. I think this item's strong. I think this champion's busted. But it's rare that you see a really good data driven article that says, this is what I've been looking into. This is a hypothesis I'm testing. Here's my results. More work could be done, but like here's a brief conclusion. And you've done that with an article called "Am I in ELO Hell," which I'll link everywhere for people to see because it's really worth. And I just love the idea of analyst writing. It's great exposure. But can you just give us like a 2 minute overview of what that article was, where you got the data, what the conclusion was, etc.?
Yeah. So basically, I'm hard stuck. Is the first point. I'm hard stuck. Plat 4. I can't climb out. It's terrible. And I sort of noticed in my back of minds, I knew it was always my top laner's fault. And I sort of thought, hey, I have the skill set to be able to sort of show and at least get the preliminary stats to show that my top lane is absolutely running it while I'm doing everything perfectly. That is obviously a huge hyperbole for anyone who's taking that seriously. I'm terrible at the game. But yeah, so I wrote the Python scripts that are included in the article pretty early on. Essentially, it's just grabbing all the data from my recent match queue. So that's an API call to the right API to grab my match history, and then an additional one to get all the match data, and sort of just finding the goal difference every interval and calculating that, putting it in a table somewhere and graphing it out. And you can sort of see, on average, is the key word that should be in bold here, how all of your lanes perform in your last however many solo queue games. And essentially, I leave it right down to the bottom of the article before I reveal what role I play, although I think most analysts main support. So, a bit of a spoiler there. And yeah, it turns out, I mean, I've ran this again recently, and I'm a bit addicted to the Sheets version of it because I will just check my stats again and again and get more angry. But yeah, something like, I think my top laner's average gold difference at 10 minutes is minus 400 gold, and at 15 is minus 600, which is pretty insane when you think about that being the average. That is really awful. So I've looked at a few of my friends who are in diamonds. I'm obviously very jealous. And yeah, their stats are more like minus 200 at maximum, sort of as their range. So yeah, I mean, you can check your own stats. There's a little short guide. Ideally, this would be on a website, but I just haven't put the time in yet. And you can go check how you line up. And yeah, you can complain to all your friends if it's not your fault, and just keep it quiet if it is. That's sort of your two options.
Yeah, it's really obvious from the visualization, and I was actually quite shocked because, in theory, League is meant to be a completely random system, like the MMR. There isn't such thing as loser queue apparently, and therefore the idea that you have statistical evidence to say that actually your top laners are worse than the average consistently was a bit of a surprise. And why that is, we have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I didn't make any like statistical hypothesis because that sounds
Yeah.
nerdy and boring. No offense, but I just did like visual stuff to show it. But yeah, I was completely surprised too. Like, you definitely think it would be like 10-0, right? Um, Average games. But the other way to think about it is that from a statistics point of view, a player has to have a certain amount of luck. Okay, they have to. These numbers are contiguous across every player at every point in time. There has to be a list of lucky and unlucky players. And yeah, you might be the most unlucky one. Okay, don't let anyone tell you different. That's my advice to people. I see articles about positive mindset. No, you're just unlucky, I promise. And you can prove it.
Or not prove it.
Or not prove it. But it
Keep
doesn't
quiet.
matter if you don't prove it.
Yeah. There's a great, I'm sure I read it in a book somewhere, which says something like, if you're going on holiday and you meet your long lost half sister, and you're like, what are the chances that we're both here in this remote town at the same time? You think it's 1 in a billion chance that this happens, but there's 6-7 billion people in the world, so therefore the chance of it happening once is actually
Yeah.
actually the expected amount is 6 times that this happens, right? So you've got to think when you come to large numbers, these sort of things kind of wash out. So yes, on average, for the average person, your top laner should have a goal difference of 0 on average across all their games. But of course, there are going to be people like yourself who fall into the 1% bucket of my top laner runs it every game.
Yeah, and I think important to mention is because I focus on top lane so much, obviously, because I play support. So unless I'm pulling a Ming and sort of going top level 3 and ganking my jungler after my back, there's very little I can do as a support to help my top laner. Like, I'll concede that, if my mid has bad stats, there's more I can do. But yeah, so if you're a jungler checking this, yeah, unlucky, because there's probably something you could do in every lane up to a point, obviously. But
Jungle
yeah.
diff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is until your chat logs get leaked, and it turns out you just flame your top laners from minute 0.
Yeah, I mean, I have my chat turned off most of the time.
Okay,
so,
we believe you.
Yeah, none of that.
Cool. Let's move on. Conscious of time, so we'll go into a quick few questions on kind of career advice for new analysts coming into the role. So imagine that they were a fellow Warwick undergrad who's interested in becoming an analyst. They come to you and say, I want some advice. How do I break into the scene? How do I become the next whatever LCS analyst? What are you telling them?
Yeah, I mean, forgetting about programming knowledge for a minute, because obviously that'll be an important part when you come to like sort of step 2 of any plan as to how you can improve a team. But step 1 would be, there are coaches out there alone on teams, or coaches and assistant coaches, sort of doing all their own preparation, grabbing stats manually from Wikipedia. There's no reason why, if you went to them, and the sad part is you probably wouldn't get paid. But if you go to a low-level team in like your regional league or even university and say, hey, how about I build you these like Google Sheets which show you the play rates, win rates, and drafts of the team you're going to play against before every match, with a few days' notice, they probably, take you with open arms. I think it's a really easy way to get experience working with people who are knowledgeable about the game, and what sort of challenges come with procuring data, how you can speed up that procuration using things like Python or Google Sheet Script if you're feeling adventurous. And yeah, from there it sort of leads on to making analysts and coaches and, as an addendum, players' lives as easy as possible with what you do and the data you collect. I think that's the core of it, really. Analysts are there to make people's lives easier um, at the end of the day. So any way you can find to do that or offer yourself to a coach is always going to be a plus one in their books for you. I don't know whether I just haven't been in the scene long enough, but that's usually an okay place to get started. And you don't even need to work for a team to do things like that, right? You can prepare for a whole league of teams once you've sort of nailed down the automation side of it in 10 minutes. Copy that all into a Google sheet and publish it, tagging all the teams or all the coaches or whatever on Twitter, showing them the nice pretty sheets you've made. And yeah, there you go. That's sort of that's demonstrable work that you've done, that you can then show to apply to a team as well. So yeah, I think one of the main things is just like to just start. Very cliche advice. Like all you have to do is just start. There's hundreds of data sources for you to start off. There's the right API. I know you have a great guide on that, Jack. There's just importing things via HTML on Leaguepedia. I think I did that in a stream somewhere. It's probably findable if you join some of these analyst discords, which is also an important part. There's stuff like LOL pros to like track player accounts and things like that. There's Bayes sample data, which you want to get into that stuff. You can use factor.gg requests to get some of the more detailed data as well. So yeah, really, there's no excuse for just not getting started. That sounds a bit harsh, but I think people should be motivated by that there is opportunities even without opportunities in a way.
Yeah, and just to go on to the point you said towards the start about not being paid, you have to accept the fact that if you are coming into the esports industry, there is a passion premium where you get paid less to work because there's so many passionate people who want to work in esports. So that means if you're at the bottom rung of this ladder, the chances are that you're going to get paid nothing because you're getting paid less than the normal person, and esports is paying less, and you're an intro the first time you get in. And it's just something you've got to accept as a trade-off, that on average you're going to be paid less than your skills would pay in the normal industry. And if that isn't what you want to do, then absolutely fine, don't do it. But don't expect to be paid the normal salary or sometimes a salary in esports. It's just the way of the world, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not as much effort as you think it needs to be. You can definitely hold a full-time job and do low-level analytics, like game prep for teams and stuff. And if you can't, then you should find ways to make your game prep easier, and that'll improve yourself as an analyst. So it's sort of a self-feeding cycle of I'm bored of spending time on this to this now takes less time to you're now a better analyst. What else can you find things to speed up and improve?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great attitude. I want to also pick on something that you said right at the very start of the interview, which was I asked why you were on Googleable, and you said, contrary to advice I would give a new analyst.
Yeah.
So just coming back to that, when a Warwick undergrad who wants to become an analyst says to you, I want to become an analyst, what do I do social media wise? Do I need one? Do I not? What is your response?
Yeah, I mean, the world of esports is on Twitter, pending its inevitable destruction, whether that's soon or not. I don't know when this is going to go out, so maybe it's already dead. But yeah, absolutely need a Twitter account. Follow your university society, follow everyone in your university society, follow UK teams, follow UK coaches, get a feel for what's going on out in the scene. This obviously goes cross country. If you're, follow the Spanish league. If you're Spanish, you'll be able to interact with the coaches. I'd assume they're the same nationality and speak the same language. So yeah, it's kind of national in that aspect, but feel free to go cross region. Everyone speaks English usually in the league scene, even if the French don't really want to in all of their tweets. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy to make a Twitter account, say you're like a budding analyst, you're looking to do things, put out all of your content. If your team hasn't stopped you, obviously don't put out stuff to do with your scrims. And yeah, like coach might come across your profile, see the follow notification, see your pinned tweet. You should probably set up a portfolio website, whether that's in Google Sheets or something that's self-hosted. And also join the iTerra Discord, because that's one of the longest standing and biggest analyst communities that I've seen. And I've been here for sort of coming on 4 years now. Most of them don't really stand the test of time. So yeah, that's
Check your
really.
PayPal, Sam. It's
is
money's
it
gone
coming
in.
through now? Okay, good. But yeah, no, seriously, it's like you can ask analysts of any level questions about their work. They'll usually be willing to help. It's quite, generally a helpful community. Analysts are always looking to sort of show off or help people. So yeah, that's really underutilized, and has been really unavailable for the last few years. So it's a good way to get your foot in the door as well, because recommendations do matter. If someone's working on a team and someone's looking for recommendations, they will ask people on other teams. It's just the way of the esports is going to be nepotism based. So yeah, sort of have to play into the game.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And well, this is a good place to carry on the Discord chat, because we've had some questions from budding analysts within our Discord. In fact, from the same person. I think all questions came from a guy called Twisted Vision. So shout out to him for coming up with some nice questions to ask Sam for this interview. I asked very late before we were about to talk, so we didn't get that many through. But let's start with the first one, which we're going to have to keep quite broad, but I'm still interested, is around KPIs. Like, what KPIs do you consider when you're analyzing scrim results, solo queue, or professional play?
Yeah, so for me personally, being on the very data side, that's not really for me to worry about too much. Sort of the invention of these KPIs are most likely sort of the responsibility of the gameplay analysts, and I'm more than happy to obviously contribute my advice into what should go into them, or construct and procure the data used to fulfill them on whatever sort of dashboard they're looking at them in. But it's a very common question, and I think he's asked it a few times. And during my time at Resolve, it's a very performance-based culture, and we also worked with some psychologists and physiologists who were also interested in tracking player performance alongside sort of non-quantitative measurements like their stress levels, their emotions, how they felt before a game, as well as things like their heartbeat during the game as well. And yeah, it's like a big question, like, give us a number that tells me how well a player's played. And I kind of had to say, well, it depends on their role, first of all, right? Like, you're going to have a KPI per role usually. I think maybe mid and top, you can have the same one. But other than that, it's going to be very broad if you're going to have each role with one. So that's the first thing to mention. And in my opinion, there's three things which should go into a KPI at least, and probably not together, because they form sort of this very positive correlation, which is XP, gold, and what's the other one I'm thinking of? CS. So don't have all of those three in them, usually, would be my advice, because you're just going to I've forgotten the statistical term, but yeah, it's just very positive
they
correlation.
compound, right? All
There
three
you
of
go.
them are
Yeah.
indicating the same.
So very, you have to make your decision there. What's the most important? I think usually I pick gold, generally, because you encapsulate everything in that metric there. So yeah, really, it's an open book. There's no solid answer. I know, it's sort of in my opinion, but yeah, there's a lot of things you can choose, and there's a lot of ways that people can shoot down your ideas. Like sort of compound variable thing being one of them. There's a few other things as well. So I'd personally, as you are, confer with other analysts. Give your suggestion, and then see what people come back with, because I doubt there's a perfect answer. But there's obviously going to be a best guess answer somewhere, and what I would propose is likely to do with gold over some function of time, obviously.
Yeah, of course, and this is of course. Stop me if we're going too far into the weeds here, but it's a common thing where there are so many extra considerations that you have to make on top of the base question that's coming to you. So someone will say, like, who is the best weak side tank in the league, right? And you're like, okay, I could just give you the results of like damage dealt, KP, whatever you want to come up with, turrets taken. But then you have to then consider the fact that they're playing different champions, and they're playing in different teams, and they might have a specific duo that they're playing with. And like, there's so many extra things that I think it can be a little overwhelming for some people. But at the same time, that shouldn't stop you trying to calculate the very basic version and then just iterate on it and get slowly better.
Yeah, it comes down to generalization, doesn't it? What generalizes well. And I think you hit a good point there where, as well as lane, you also need to think about class, which isn't really talked about in League much. But things like tank, control mage, they have their own built in into the client. But yeah, those are also going to be super important in constructing things like I don't really care about the damage dealt by a tank. I care about the damage mitigated or the CC score. So yeah, maybe have like a top lane tank category, maybe have a top lane fighter, top lane ranged, and it sort of breaks down into a nice tree like that. But yeah, then you can argue, is it generalizable? Probably not. So
There's always going to be some, no matter how much you treat it, there's always going to be something that falls outside of your rules. The
yeah,
good example is damage mitigation, you'd think. So damage mitigation, for those who haven't spent a lot of time in the Riot API, is basically how much damage you tanked via statistics, usually. So like armor and MR, how much has that prevented you from taking damage? Um, which sounds great, right? So that's a great way of finding the tanks on a team until you find out that Tryndamere R counts as damage mitigated. So you have this, you try classifying them using this data, and then you're like, okay, Scion, lots of mitigation damage, that makes sense. And then you see Tryndamere, and you're like, now I have to start
yeah,
again, but with different rules to try and account for that.
yeah. This is a brick wall I've ran into many times. People have been asking me this question, and yeah, it's a good, like, I think I've used the phrase before, thread to pull when you're trying to come up with this one and all statistic, because in my opinion, it just doesn't exist. In the same way that yeah, people try to generalize in game who's going to win based on statistics. Obviously, bookmakers do it, but yeah, I imagine that's probably per champion, because how else would you do it if it wasn't so specific? And then you've got to think about training models per champion on games, especially competitive games, which probably play different to scrims. How much data do you have there? Probably not much. And then it changes every 2 weeks. So yeah, there's a lot of restrictions to doing sort of this investigative data analysis in League. And I think at least Itero does a good job of, I think it's one of the use cases I would say is free from a lot of the burdens of yeah, those sort of limitations, because you're not limited by a small amount of competitive data, and the findings don't usually change too much patch to patch. So um, yeah,
Yeah, I think the data one is the real winner, right? The fact that I can analyze a million games when
yeah,
you're stuck on eight or something on
yeah,
this patch, right? And that's in Korea mostly, right? So um, yeah, we're essentially going around, a long way around, just saying it's a very difficult question that sounds a lot more difficult than it actually is, and the only way to find out how difficult it is to try and do it yourself,
yeah.
and then realize all of the compounding problems that end up coming up. Cool. So I just wanted to talk specifically more about findings. So the kind of the outcome of what you're doing. So I know you're very much like a data guy, right, from the infrastructural side of things. But has there ever been a time, or could you envisage a time in which that your data has discovered something? There's a kind of like a new take on whatever it is, whether that's draft, whether that's like macro decisions that need to be changed, whether it's a player that's worth scouting, and sort of either an example if you've got one, but if not, just kind of how you would approach speaking to the team about that, given that you're kind of like Sam, the infrastructure guy, suddenly turning up with a piece of data. So if you could just walk us through how you would kind of approach that situation.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's something I try and avoid doing. What my take on it would be, provide as much utility so that the pros can do it themselves. Um, but to give my thoughts on it, I think if you're sort of halfway into the split, there's very little you can do in terms of finding picks other than like leaks from teams, which obviously isn't great. But one thing which is sort of subconscious to players is their movement, especially around level one, if they haven't like got a specific plan involved, and also warding patterns is like very important. Does a mid laner, and you can break this down by champ or by side, ward, top or bot brush at whatever minute. And if you can sort of nail down the usual suspected ward position, you can inform your jungler, and this information would usually dilute through myself, either me saying it or via the app, to one of the analysts, and then the analysts of the teams themselves through the coaches. So I'm sort of one step removed from the players, although yeah, I enjoyed hanging out with them when I got the chance. So yeah, those are two places I think you can look. Of course, once you have access to bays, since those are both only available.
Yeah, it's one of
So
the sucky things, right? About for the amateur analyst, you don't have access to the full data. But that's a really good example. I can remember, I think it was Worlds. There was a mid laner who would always ward not the lane brush, but slightly further out of the lane brush, so you kind of get more of the
mm-hmm.
river warded. And then someone, I want to say Yankos, but I'm probably wrong, flashed the wall like level
Yeah.
2 to avoid, because they clearly, someone like Sam had found out this pattern of they don't actually ward in the brush, they ward slightly outside of it. There's a dark spot here that you can utilize.
Yeah. I think there's some sort of, you have to have analysts, like other analysts on your team, or at least a coach who's like welcoming of those sort of theories. Like, rather than play the game to play the game, it's sort of metagaming in a way, right? It's a little bit dirty, I think, viewed by some people, because you're not playing the game as a flat thing that you're coming into as equals. Obviously, scouting and in-game scouting, rather than just the concept of draft, which everyone's very familiar with, it can prove, especially around level ones, if you manage to cheese a team that usually sets up in a certain way, then you have probably won the game off that in most circumstances. And of course, like mid lane wards, getting a kill off mids at the right wave position is probably going to win you the game. It opens up the map hugely. So yeah, there's a few things where I think it's partly to luck, because obviously there's going to be a chance that they don't set up in a certain way or they don't ward a certain way. But yeah, if you want to take a gamble or give yourself the best chance, then absolutely those two things, sort of metagaming, can help very much in wins.
Awesome, great advice. And I think to summarize kind of the first question is that you're saying make your output of data so good that it kind of speaks for itself, that you don't
Yeah.
need to go and then and argue the case, because it's so blindedly obvious for anyone with game knowledge to look at your data and say, okay, I see what he's trying to tell me. I see where the advantage is here.
Yeah, that's where sort of my responsibility ends, I'd say, and is why it has to be as good as possible, which is I'm displaying data in a clear and concise way that's understandable by everyone who's viewing it, to the point where, you'd have to be an idiot not to sort of try it out or use it. So yeah, if you find yourself with data in front of you talking to a coach with just like numbers on a table, it's probably not going to help much trying to convince them. But if you come in with a heat map with some VODs by your side, you're gonna have a much better chance, right? So yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic advice. Right, we'll close off with our final question, and I'm hoping that you are going to have a good take on this. So we ask all the analysts the same one, which is, what is your favorite statistic? But I'm just going to add a little spin on it for you, since your role is very much creating these statistics, right? Like that is essentially all you. Is there been a statistic that you've really enjoyed creating, whether it's kind of like taken a bit more thinking through, it's been more of a problem to solve on how you actually get hold of that, or if not, just default to the what is your favorite?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, jungle proximity is always a fun one. I think people usually follow the factor.gg definition of that now. So it's not too bad once you have, this is the calculation side. I mean, it's not too bad once you have sort of the format you want, but grabbing stuff from bays always adds an extra layer of fun to anything you might want to create. Okay, yeah, it would probably be, and I don't know whether someone's mentioned this before, is gold earned irrespective of the passive gold in the game. That's kind of an interesting one that one of my analysts asked me about, because I guess it's like a base rate that you take away from two players at the same time anyway. Um, but it gives you some interesting insight into like proportions of gold earned, because obviously like an extra value, like flat value on both of those ruins that a little bit. So yeah, that's quite an interesting one where you talk about someone has double the gold of someone else. Well, that fraction is even larger when you think about like the passive gold earned is taken away. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure like how you'd think about the implementations or use of that stat, but it's one I'm pretty interested in, and I thought it was pretty creative when I think it was Brendan who came to me with that one.
Yeah, it's you also have to not only take away the passive gold, but also the 500 gold that you
Yeah.
start with at the start of the game. So essentially, that graph that you see in pro play all the time, which is like two teams getting more and more gold over time, that becomes a flat line. And rather than seeing like gradual increases in a bigger variance, you just see the variance as a flat line, which can look easier to understand
Yeah.
because you don't have the time element. So in a game that's 60 minutes long, if you have the same, if the y-axis is the max size, then it can look a bit skewed. So if you look at a 60-minute game and a 20-minute game, you could think that one team is massively further ahead than the other at the 20-minute mark, but it's not. It's just because of the scale of that y-axis has got so big. We've
Yeah.
lost everyone there, but
Yeah, I mean that actually only matters if you're doing just one team's gold earn, right? Because if you do gold difference, then it cancels out.
yes, yeah, sorry, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So the two teams
Yeah,
gold
that's
over time.
a good point. That is a good point. I like that.
Cool, awesome. Well, this has been a great pleasure, Sam, to speak to a fellow Brit. A little bit too much about the British scene at the start, but we then moved away.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.
Is there anywhere you wanna tag that I can chuck in the description for people to find you and read more about what you're up to?
Just my Twitter should be good. That's my only real outlet for esports stuff. And then I think my website's in there as well, but I need to add it back to my Twitter actually, but it's just samuelhine.co.uk.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Sam. I will add both of those to the bottom of whatever portal you're listening to this on. But thanks very much for listening, and thanks, Sam, for joining us.
No worries. Cheers.